these are the staves that we use to make the urns out of, and we cut these on the table saw from 3/4 inch raw material. They're about 8 inches long and about 2.5 inches wide, and they're cut at an angle, as you can see, and that is the right angle for a 12-sided figure, or dodecahedron, I believe it's called. So what we do is we line these all up so you have a nice grain pattern and get them straight, and we mark the top and we mark the sequence. And the way I do it, it's a pretty standard thing in woodworking, is you just draw a line along here like so, so you know that that's the bottom, and then you draw a diagonal so that every one of these has a line in a different place. So if you get them mixed up, you can easily get them back in the right order, and it's a good check as you're gluing up and working through the next steps. So what we're going to do next is, we'll just set this aside. We'll stand these up and make sure everything is going to fit together okay. Make sure we don't have to do any trimming or sanding or planing to get these to fit together properly. And if everything's cut properly, we should just be able to move straight into the gluing step, which I expect we should be able to do. There. And as we tighten it up, everything aligns itself there. See? So everything's fitting nicely. There's no gaps. So I'm happy with that. So what we'll do is we'll back this off. We'll put the glue on, and then we'll put the clamp back on there. Okay. The next stage, once we get this 12-sided figure glued up, is we need to make the stack that makes up the top of the urn. So what we do is we have 3 pieces of wood, and we simply glue them together. This is the top that covers everything. This will be the dome, and this is a sacrificial piece that we'll use to hold on the lathe when we turn it. Okay, so those will just all get glued up, and they will get glued on top of here, and what you end up with is this. Okay, and this is all ready to go on the lathe. Okay, so the next step is we're going to take this finished assembly and we're going to put it on the lathe. Okay, so we've got the lathe all set up. We've got a fixture made that fits into the end here, so it self-centers, and we've marked the center on this end. So we're just going to put it on here. Now we'll just check and see that it is really and truly centered. We do that by using our tool rest, and I'm just watching the gap between the staves as they rotate. And it looks pretty good, so we're ready to start turning. So what we're going to do first is make this end here round. So we've got this rounded off. We've got this rounded, sort of. We're going to cut this down to fit in the chuck right now, and we'll get this sized properly. And then we'll turn it around and we'll finish turning the rest of it. Okay. Pretty close. So we'll take this off. We're going to mount the chuck on here. So there's three steps to this turning process. The first one was we made a tenon on the end here to fit in the chuck. Now what we've got to do is we are going to cut a recess in the bottom of here so that our bottom fits in. And that will also allow us to attach a faceplate to this end so that we can then turn this back around and do the final shape. We can make the top and we can work our way back and make this that final shape that you see in the finished product, which will look like this. So right now this is on here like this, and we're going to cut the recess here for the bottom to fit in. When that's done, we'll mount a plate on here, we'll flip it around, put it back on, and then we'll turn the top, cut these screws, this, and the final shape. Okay? There, it's all ready to go for the next step. Last thing I'm going to do here is just trim the bottom up so that it's nice and smooth and flat. What we'll do, we always turn with the tailstock on whenever we can. It's just safer. So we'll put this back in place while we do some of the heavy part of the turning here, and at the very end we'll take it off and we'll finish the dome on top. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the basic shape going. This top part is usually in diameter about an eighth of an inch narrower than it is at the bottom. So we'll get that taper set up, put a little curve on here, and then about 1 inch up, we're going to cut our groove, our you know, what you call that, the angled cut, and then the cove cut. I forget what it's okay. So there we got our groove cuts in the bottom, and we've started to shape our top, and we'll just finish up the top now. Now we've got our cove cut, we've got our basically marked out where our 4 steps are going to be, and now we'll turn the dome on the rest of here. So the next steps that we would go to here would be to do some very fine cuts on here, then go through sanding, starting probably at about 100 grit sandpaper, working our way up to 400 grit, then putting on some boiled linseed oil, letting that dry, and then putting on six or 7 coats of shellac. And shellac dries very, very fast. So you can put on those 6 coats in less than an hour.
And this is all on the lathe while
And it's all done on the lathe while this is turning. So it comes out beautiful just like this. When that's all done, we put a coat of wax on just to seal them and protect them on their way into the internment. Okay. The one thing that we do at the very end as we prepare these for the individuals that are being interred is we get a list from the Missing in America project with the names of the folks that are going to go in these and what branch of the service they were in. And what we do is we drill a hole here, or a counterbore was what we call it, and we put the emblem of their branch of the service and their name, their rank, and the branch of the service that they served in, and what conflicts they may have been involved in during what years. So, and that all goes on here, and that's what we give to the project to take care of the rest of it for the ceremony. Okay.
Once a year, we usually make a trip to the Tampa International Woodworking Show, which is quite a large event. And at one of these shows, we happened to notice that there was an exhibit by a local woodworking group, and a part of their exhibit were some pretty rustic urns that they had been making for sale, and in some cases for veteran friends. My colleagues and I had taken a look at them and said, I think we can do a lot better than this. Let's go back home and make some plans and see what happens. And that's the actual beginning of all this. We then had a gentleman who recently passed away, Brad Ferguson, who was really spearheaded a lot of the connection between us and the veterans to get this program started, where we provide the urns for the burial at the National Cemetery. Having said that, we work closely now with the Missing in America project and Paul Marconi to actually coordinate with the urns that we build, picking them up. He supplies the actual brass plates with the names that he's given for that particular burial. And that's in a nutshell how it all took place.
Well, there's actually two guilds that participate in this. There's the South Florida Woodworking Guild and the Gold Coast Woodturning Guild. And the Gold Coast group is strictly woodturners, and most of them participate in the turning activity and have helped us a lot with the final design that we've got that we do on the lathe here. And the Woodworking Guild, the South Florida Woodworking Guild, is the group that mills all the lumber, gets all the kits together, and glues them all up for the wood turning guild to work on. Altogether, there's probably about 30 to 35 people involved in making these urns. And we've produced probably more than 150 urns in the last 18 months.
Our particular affiliation is only with the actual National Cemetery in South Florida, which is located in Lake Worth. There are other groups around the nation that are involved, and I'm not sure exactly how that works for them, but this South Florida group only works with the National Cemetery in Lake Worth. Okay. I had a concept in mind, and I, not being a very good wood turner, I had only made chess pieces. I had thought of something that represented a memorial to me, and then as well as something that we could build as an urn practically, as many people as possible. So I thought that to keep it stable, let's not work with a solid tree trunk. So I experimented with the stave process that you have seen, and starting off with my initial one was 8. But the more pieces that you have, the easier it is to turn into a round shape. So my idea was the top should be similar to the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. as a memorial, and then building it as a stave, I did a model that we started out with, and then Stuart actually took the idea to the Gold Coast group, and they put their heads together and came up with the design that you currently see, which is a much more finished product. And then, of course, with the talent that Stuart and the wood turners have, you can see that the results are really spectacular.
The wood is donated by lumber companies locally. Wellesley Lumber has, or Whittlesey's has donated a lot of lumber to us. Sheridan Lumber has donated lumber, and many individuals have donated lumber that they had in their shops. And this all helps as well. There's a local gentleman that's part of our woodworking guild who has a sawmill and has access to all kinds of the local lumber, which he cuts into lumber. he's donated a couple of truckloads to us.
Which is an
And
arborist.
so we make these out of cherry, which grows here in the northeastern U.S., black walnut, which grows throughout the Midwest along the riverbanks. We make them out of mahogany that grows locally here in South Florida, Cuban mahogany. We make them out of tamarind, which grows here in South Florida. And we've made them out of rosewood, which also grows here in South Florida. And I've got some examples right here if you want to see them. So this one is made out of tamarind that's grown locally, and it's very, very beautiful figured golden color. This is rosewood, and this is highly figured. It's beautiful, beautiful wood, and it finishes up very, very nicely. And then I've got an example here of the local, what we call Cuban mahogany. And that's what this looks like when it's said and done. And they're actually, they're all very unique, but they're very, very nice.
Now, just take a look, for instance, at the one that's mounted on the lathe, the same material, and once you touch this with the actual varnish, it pops and shows all the grain, and then once, of course, you smooth the finish. But it's just amazing the difference once you just touch it. Now, all that finish, you can see polishing and so forth, takes place while the lathe is spinning, including the wax finish that brings that shine up.
I think we figure it's between about 5 and 7 hours. Probably the first time through, anybody makes one, it's going to be about 7 hours altogether. But once you've made a few, you perfect the process. You know what you got to do. It's about 5 hours. But yeah, we'll cut up the lumber, and we'll spend a weekend doing that. And we'll cut up enough lumber to make 75 or 80 urns. But then from there on, the glue up, each one takes probably 45 minutes to an hour to do.
He'll bring the kits for the glue up,
yeah.
and then they'll just take all the staves, the top levels, glue them up in place, and then bring them to someone else who'll do the turning process.
Yeah. And then the turning, as you've seen here, takes probably about an hour to an hour and a half. And the finishing the sanding takes about another hour, and then the finish going on is about another hour. And then we spend maybe 15, 20 minutes putting the emblem for the branch of service and the nameplate on. I like woodworking, and so anytime I can be out here making something, that's great. The fact that we can do this for such a worthy cause, for me, is all I need. Yeah.
And I feel the same. Basically, I'm like Stuart. I'll spend time in my shop doing whatever associated with woodwork because I have a passion for it. And once having seen the ceremony that takes place and understanding the entire process of finding these forgotten heroes and giving them a place and an actual, what the end that they deserve, I really, it gives me an extra push, an extra incentive. And I even try to bring an extra bit of quality into it for that reason, because I want to make sure they have a special send-off.
Everybody donates their shops and their tools and their time. We don't pay ourselves for that. We do this because we want to do it.
Right. This is something that it's only supplies and lumber. That's the only thing we need donations for. Now, one thing, having said that, we're not going to use knotty pine to build these. First of all, the quality has to be there to make a proper send-off and to look good. So we're not, if you look at the pricing, just standard pricing on cherry, if you go to wood supply, you'll see what this kind of wood costs. We often get a special price or donation. However, so there have been times when we had to go and dip into our pockets and we have limited money. So that, just to give an idea, the wood is not inexpensive. It does cost quite a bit. As Stuart mentioned, though, we have been flooded with donations this last year, and so we've been very fortunate.